July 31st, 1944, 11:42 p.m. A mud-slick crossroads near Avranches, France. The air is thick with the sulfurous stench of spent artillery shells and the metallic tang of diesel exhaust. Rain, cold and relentless, lashes against the steel hulls of Sherman tanks. You can hear it, the rhythmic, deafening clack-clack-clack of tracks grinding against stone, a sound that has become the heartbeat of a breaking continent. In the center of this swirling chaos stands a figure that seems carved from granite. He wears a lacquered helmet that catches the dim light of a burning farmhouse nearby. At his hips, the ivory grips of his Colt. .45s gleam, a flash of vanity in a world of olive drab. General George S. Patton Jr. isn't in a command tent miles behind the lines. He is here, in the mud, waving a shimmering flashlight like a conductor's baton, screaming over the roar of engines to keep the column moving. "Go! Go!" he bellows, his voice a gravelly rasp. "I don't care about your flanks. I don't care about sleep. I want you in the German rear before the sun rises." For months, the German High Command, the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, had been obsessed with a ghost. They were convinced that the real Allied invasion would come at the Pas-de-Calais, led by the man they feared and respected above all others, Patton. They had tracked his 1st U.S. Army Group across the English Channel, monitoring radio traffic, spotting inflatable tanks and wooden planes from their reconnaissance flights. To Hitler, Patton was the only Allied general who understood the Blitzkrieg better than the Germans themselves. But as the clock strikes midnight, a terrifying realization begins to ripple through the German telephone lines. From the frontline trenches to the maps spread out in the Wolf's lair, the man in Kent, the commander of the Phantom Army, has just materialized 150 miles away from where he was supposed to be. Earlier that evening, in a dimly lit bunker in East Prussia, Adolf Hitler hovered over a map of the Normandy beachhead. His fingers, trembling slightly from the onset of the Parkinson's he so desperately hid, traced the thin line of the Cotentin Peninsula. He had been told for weeks that the Normandy landings were a feint, a bloody distraction to draw his panzers away from the real target. Where is Patton? The intelligence reports from the Abwehr were always the same. Patton is still in England. The blow is yet to fall. But tonight, the reports are changing. They are fragmented, panicked, and utterly impossible. A German colonel near Avranches reports a tidal wave of steel pouring through a gap in the line no wider than a single road. He describes American tanks moving with a reckless, suicidal speed, bypassing strong points, refusing to stop for fuel, and ignoring every established doctrine of orderly warfare. This isn't the slow, methodical grinding of Montgomery. This is something else. As Patton stands at that crossroads, he is unleashing the Third Army, a force that had been kept under wraps, hidden in the shadows of the Normandy hedgerows until this very moment. In the last 24 hours, he has moved 7 divisions through a single bottleneck, a feat of logistics and sheer willpower that defied every German calculation. The old blood and guts isn't just attacking. He is sprinting. Back at the Wolf's lair, the atmosphere shifts from confident denial to a cold, creeping dread. If Patton has reached Avranches, the entire German 7th Army is no longer defending a front, it is being encircled. The door to the interior of France, the open plains where tanks can roam free, has just been kicked off its hinges. Hitler stares at the map, his eyes fixed on the tiny dot representing Avranches. He looks at General Jodl, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous hiss. "If this is Patton," Hitler mutters, "then the entire Western Front is a lie." But the nightmare for the German commanders is only beginning. They are about to learn that Patton doesn't plan to stop at the breakthrough. He is heading for a destination that no one, not even his own superiors in the Allied High Command, expects him to reach so soon. August 2nd, 1944, 3 a.m. Field Marshal von Kluge's forward command post, Western France. The room is suffocating. Smoke from cheap German cigarettes hangs like a fog over the mahogany tables, and the only sound is the rhythmic, frantic clack-clack-clack of the Enigma machines and the shrill ring of field telephones. Field Marshal Gunther von Kluge, the man Hitler has tasked with stopping the rot, stares at a tactical map that looks like a crime scene. Red arrows the Americans are no longer pushing against the line. They have punctured it, and now they are bleeding out into the French countryside in every direction. Where is the Third Army's head? Kluge demands, his voice tight with a suppressed tremor. His intelligence officer hesitates. Sir, we have reports of American armor in Brittany, but we also have reports of them 60 miles to the east, near Le Mans, and there are sightings of Patton himself near the front at Mortain. Kluge slams his fist onto the table. That is impossible. A single army cannot be in 3 places at once. But that was the genius and the terror of George S. Patton. While the German military doctrine, the vaunted Auftragstaktik, relied on disciplined initiative, Patton was practicing something the Germans hadn't seen since their own invasion of France in 1940, unbridled chaos. Patton knew that as long as he kept moving, the German ogre, the massive bureaucratic machine of the Wehrmacht, couldn't reset its feet. He wasn't just fighting soldiers. He was fighting the German concept of time. Visual. A montage of Sherman tanks racing past burning German half-tracks, Gias clinging to the turrets, dust clouds swallowing the French villages. You can almost feel the vibration of the ground as the 4th and 6th Armored Divisions tear across the landscape. To the German Lanzer, the common foot soldier Patton's tanks didn't feel like an army. They felt like a force of nature. They didn't stop to consolidate. They didn't wait for their infantry to catch up. They simply drove. When a German unit tried to set up an ambush, Patton's lead elements would often simply drive around them, leaving the trap to be dealt with by the following waves. This was psychological warfare at 30 miles per hour. Back in East Prussia, at the Wolfschanz, Hitler's alarm has curdled into a cold, murderous fury. He ignores the pleas of his generals to withdraw the 7th Army before it is trapped. Instead, he orders a gamble that borders on the insane, Operation Luttich. Hitler's plan is simple on paper. Collect every available panzer, strike west toward the sea at Avranches, and cut the neck of Patton's breakthrough. If he can reach the coast, he can trap Patton's entire Third Army in a pocket and starve them of fuel. We will hit them where they are weakest, Hitler declares to his inner circle. Patton has overextended. He has left his flank wide open. He is a cowboy, not a strategist. We will show him the German steel, but Hitler is making a fatal mistake. He is measuring Patton by the standards of a traditional general. He assumes Patton is worried about his supplies, his rear, and his flanks. He doesn't realize that Patton has already anticipated the move. On August 7th, as the morning mist begins to lift over the town of Mortain, the German panzers roar to life. Hundreds of Mark IVs and Panthers surge forward, their muzzles spitting fire. For a moment, it looks as though Hitler's gamble might work. The American lines buckle. The neck of the breakthrough is under immense pressure. At his mobile headquarters, a converted bus he calls the Circus, Patton is informed of the German counterattack. His staff is pale, expecting the order to retreat or at least to halt the westward drive to defend the flank. Patton doesn't even look up from his map. He lights a cigar, the blue smoke curling around his polished helmet. "Let him come," he says, a predatory grin spreading across his face. "They're just making it easier for us to kill him all at once. Tell the divisions in the south to keep moving. Don't slow down for a damn second." The German commanders are baffled. Usually when an army's supply line is threatened, it stops. It pivots. It panics. But Patton's Third Army is doing the opposite. It is accelerating away from the threat, driving deeper into the German rear, cutting off the very panzers that are trying to cut him off. As the sun sets over Mortain, the German panzers find themselves not in a position of triumph, but in a giant flaming trap. Patton has called in the Jabos, the Allied fighter bombers, and the sky begins to rain fire. Hitler receives the news in his bunker. The counterattack has failed. But that isn't what causes the color to drain from his face. It's the next report from the front. Patton isn't just ignoring the counterattack. He has just turned his army 90 degrees in a maneuver that should have taken weeks to coordinate, and he is now racing toward a location that threatens to end the war in France in a single stroke. Hitler looks at the map and whispers a single word that carries the weight of a dying empire. Falaise, August 13, 1944, 2 p.m. A sun-scorched ridgeline overlooking the town of Argentan. The heat is oppressive, a shimmering haze that distorts the horizon. From this vantage point, the French countryside looks like a tapestry of gold and green, but the air tells a different story. It carries the thick, cloying stench of thousands of rotting horse carcasses and the acrid smoke of burning Panther tanks. You are standing with a forward observer of the 5th Armored Division. Through your binoculars you see it, a single narrow road choked with the remains of the German 7th Army. It is a river of gray uniforms, horse-drawn carts, and elite Tiger tanks, all flowing in one direction east. They aren't marching. They are fleeing. And they are running straight into the jaws of a trap. While Hitler was obsessed with his counterattack at Mortain, Patton had performed the feat of operational magic. He didn't just defend, he exploited the German movement. He swung his the 15th Corps north, a lightning-fast pivot that caught the German flank completely exposed. Suddenly, the hunters had become the hunted. In the north, the British and Canadians were pushing down. In the south, Patton was screaming upward. Between them lay a shrinking gap near the town of Falaise. "We've got 'em in a bag," Patton reportedly exclaimed, his high-pitched voice crackling with excitement. "We were going to kick the hell out of them and then drive them into the sea." Visual, a tactical animation showing the blue Allied lines curving around the gray German mass, leaving only a tiny 15-mile opening, the Falaise Gap. Inside that bag were 100,000 German soldiers. Among them were the remnants of the elite SS Panzer divisions, the very backbone of Hitler's defense in the West. If Patton closed that gap, the war in Europe might not just be shortened, it might be over by Christmas. But at the Wolfslair, the panic has reached a fever pitch. Hitler's personal physician, Dr. Morall, is reportedly increasing the Führer's dosages of glucose and caffeine just to keep him upright. Hitler is no longer screaming orders. He is staring at the map of the Falaise pocket with a hollow, haunted look. He realizes that Patton isn't playing by the rules of the Great War. He isn't interested in seizing territory or capturing strategic objectives. Patton is hunting units. He is seeking the total destruction of the German army as a fighting force. How can he supply them? Where is his fuel coming from? The answer was as terrifying as it was simple. Patton didn't care if his tanks ran dry. He told his commanders to drive until the engines died, then get out and walk toward the enemy. However, as the steel noose begins to tighten around the German 7th Army, a new tension arises not between the Allies and the Germans, but within the Allied High Command itself. General Omar Bradley, Patton's superior and a man of cautious, methodical temperament, looks at the map and sees a danger that Patton chooses to ignore. Bradley fears that if Patton pushes too far north to close the gap, he will be pinched by the retreating Germans, or worse, his thin lines will be crushed by the sheer weight of a desperate enemy trying to break out. On the afternoon of August 13th, the order arrives at Patton's headquarters. It is a bucket of ice water thrown on a raging fire. Halt at Argentan. Do not move further north. Patton is livid. He is less than 15 miles from closing the trap completely. He can practically see the dust clouds from the British tanks to the north. "Let me go on." Patton bellows into the radio to Bradley. "I'll drive the British into the sea for another Dunkirk if I have to, but let me close this gap." The order stands. The gap remains open by a mere 12 miles. For the German soldiers trapped inside, this halt order is a miracle from God. They begin a frantic, nighttime dash through the corridor of death, a narrow gauntlet of fire where Allied artillery and planes rain hell down upon them 24 hours a day. Hitler sees this as a momentary reprieve, a chance to save his best troops. But Patton isn't finished. If he isn't allowed to close the door, he will simply find another way to burn the house down. As the remnants of the Wehrmacht scramble through the mud of the Falaise Gap, they think they are escaping to safety. They think the Phantom General has been stopped by his own side. They couldn't be more wrong. Because while the world is watching the carnage at Falaise, George S. Patton is already looking 200 miles to the east. He is about to launch a drive so audacious, so impossible by every military textbook, that it will force Hitler to make a decision that will ultimately seal the fate of the Third Reich. The question isn't where Patton is now. The question is, where will he appear when the smoke clears? August 21, 1944, 10:15 a.m. A wheat field near Chartres, France. The sound isn't the boom of cannons anymore. It's the high-pitched whistle of wind over a speeding jeep. Patton sits in the passenger seat, his face caked in a layer of fine, white French dust. He looks less like a general and more like a pirate. Behind him, the Third Army isn't just moving. It has achieved a state of mechanical grace. "General, the maps don't go this far," his driver shouts over the engine. Patton splashes a canteen of water over his face and grins. "Then use the ones in the National Geographic. Just keep the sun on your right shoulder and drive." This was the Great Race. While the Allied command was still tallying the horrific cost of the Falaise pocket, where 50,000 Germans were captured and 10,000 lay dead in the mud, Patton had already dismissed the battle as yesterday's news. He had turned his tanks east toward the Seine River, toward Paris and beyond. The pace was so blistering that it broke the German intelligence network. In Berlin, the Lage West Situation West maps were being updated every hour, and every hour they were wrong. In the bunkers of the Wolfschanze, the atmosphere has shifted from panic to a surreal, hollow silence. Hitler sits in his daily briefing, staring at a map where the front line has simply ceased to exist. He sees icons for German divisions, the 9th Panzer, the 130th Panzer Lehr, but they are ghosts. They are being bypassed, surrounded, or simply run over before they can even unpack their radios. Patton is at the Seine, Jodl reports, his voice trembling. He has established bridgeheads at Mantes Gassicourt. He is bypassing Paris. Hitler looks up, his eyes bloodshot. Bypassing? He does not want the capital? He wants the Rhine, mein Führer, Jodl replies. He is moving so fast our panzers cannot find a fuel depot that hasn't already been captured. This was Hitler's greatest fear realized. The German army was designed for a Begegnungskrieg, a war of movement. But Patton was outmoving them. He was using their own philosophy against them, but with the industrial might of Detroit behind him. The German commanders began to call Patton the American Guderian, but Guderian, the father of the Blitzkrieg, had never moved 400,000 men across 400 miles in 26 days. Visual, a split screen. On one side, exhausted German soldiers retreating on foot or horse-drawn wagons. On the other, endless columns of American 2.5-ton trucks, the Red Ball Express, thundering down French highways. You can see the desperation in the German response. They began to scavenge anything that could move. They used bicycles, oxen, even ancient Renault tanks from the First World War. But against the mechanized juggernaut of the Third Army, it was like trying to stop a tidal wave with a picket fence. But then, just as the German collapse seemed total, the ghost hit a wall. It wasn't a wall of panzers. It wasn't a line of bunkers. It was something far more mundane, yet far more lethal to a mechanized army. An empty fuel tank. On August 31st, the lead tanks of the 4th Armored Division, just miles from the Meuse River and the German border, sputtered and died. The crews sat on their hulls, looking at the open road ahead, and waited. The fuel lines, the literal lifeblood of Patton's speed, had been diverted. General Eisenhower and Montgomery had made a decision. The fuel would go to the north, to Operation Market Garden. Patton was to be throttled. Back in Berlin, Hitler receives the news. The American advance has stopped. The Phantom has finally run out of steam. For the first time in weeks, Hitler laughs. It is a dry, hacking sound. "They have stopped him," Hitler says, a dark light returning to his eyes. "They have given us the one thing we needed, time." Hitler immediately orders a total mobilization. He calls for the Volkssturm, old men and young boys, to man the West Wall. He begins to dream of a final, desperate counterstroke in the Ardennes. He believes Patton is finished, sidelined by his own commanders. But Hitler has forgotten one thing about George Patton. A man doesn't need an army to be a threat. He only needs a grievance. And while the German army begins to rebuild its shattered lines, Patton is in his tent, looking at a map of the Ardennes forest, sensing a storm that no one else sees coming. The cowboy isn't brooding over his empty tanks. He's preparing for the greatest unexpected move of his career, one that will take place in the middle of a frozen hell. December 19th, 1944, 11 a.m. A drafty limestone barracks in Verdun, France. The air inside the briefing room is colder than the winter gale howling outside. General Dwight D. Eisenhower sits at the head of a rough wooden table, his face a mask of exhaustion. Around him, the top brass of the Allied command stare at a map that looks like a nightmare. A massive German bulge has punched through the Ardennes forest. 3 German armies, nearly 300,000 men, are pouring through the American lines under the cover of a thick, impenetrable fog. The 101st Airborne is about to be cut off at a small Belgian crossroads called Bastogne. The mood is one of controlled panic. "The situation is grave," Eisenhower says, his voice flat. He turns to the man sitting to his right, who is calmly polishing his fingernails. "George, I want you to go to Luxembourg and take charge of the southern flank. When can you attack?" Patton doesn't hesitate. He doesn't consult a staff officer. He doesn't look at a ledger. "The morning of the 21st, Patton says. "With 3 divisions." A stunned silence falls over the room. You can almost hear the skepticism in the heavy breathing of the other generals. To move 3 full divisions over 250,000 men and 130,000 vehicles, nearly 100 miles over icy, narrow roads in the middle of a blizzard, and launch a full-scale counterattack in just 48 hours? It was logistically impossible. It was a suicide mission. "Don't be fatuous, George," General any man would have said. But Patton just stared them down. Visual. A map showing the Bulge with the 3rd Army positioned far to the south. Facing east, a massive red arrow suddenly pivots 90 degrees north toward Bastogne. While the Allied High Command was debating, Patton had already set the wheels in motion. He had sensed the German move days before it happened. He had already ordered his staff to prepare 3 separate what-if plans. While the German commanders, Field Marshal Model and General Manteuffel, were celebrating their initial breakthrough, Patton was performing the military equivalent of a handbrake turn with 250,000 men. You can feel the grit of the ice on the roads. Thousands of 3rd Army truck drivers, many of them black soldiers from the Red Ball Express, are white-knuckling steering wheels, driving through the night with no headlights to avoid German bombers. They are sliding around hairpin turns, winching tanks out of frozen ditches, and shivering in the -10-degree cold. Meanwhile, at the Wolfschanz, Hitler is jubilant. He is convinced that the Americans are too decadent and bureaucratic to react to a crisis. His intelligence officers have told him that Patton is pinned down in the mud of the Saar region, hundreds of miles away. The Americans are paralyzed, Hitler tells his generals. They are arguing in their headquarters while we march on Antwerp. By the time Patton can turn his army around, we will have split the Allies in two. Hitler's strategy relied entirely on the belief that an army of that size was like a great, lumbering beast incapable of changing direction quickly. But Patton wasn't leading a beast. He was leading a scalpel. On the morning of December 21st, exactly as promised, the lead elements of Patton's Third Army didn't just appear near the Ardennes, they hit the German southern flank like a sledgehammer. German soldiers of the 5th Panzer Army, who believed their left flank was secure, were suddenly vaporized by a concentration of American artillery fire that seemed to come out of nowhere. The panic that had gripped London and Washington 48 hours earlier now shifted to the German bunkers. Who is attacking us? Manteuffel demanded from his forward post. The answer came back in a frantic radio burst. It's the Third Army. It's the ivory-handled pistols. Patton is here. Hitler's jaw reportedly dropped when the news reached him. It shouldn't have been possible. No army in the history of warfare had ever pivoted that fast, in that weather, with that much lethality. But the cowboy had one more card to play. As his tanks chewed through the German lines toward the starving paratroopers in Bastogne, Patton realized that the only thing stopping him from a total victory wasn't the panzers, it was the sky. He was about to issue an order that would become the stuff of legend, a move so audacious it bordered on the divine, forcing a final, desperate confrontation that Hitler never saw coming. December 23, 1944, 4:30 a.m., a frozen field near Arles, Belgium. The world is a silent, suffocating white. For days, a thick milky fog has draped the Ardennes, grounding every Allied plane and turning the battlefield into a claustrophobic hell of shadows and ghosts. German panzers move with impunity under this gray shroud, knowing that the Jabos, the dreaded American fighter bombers, are blind. In his mobile headquarters, Patton is pacing like a caged tiger. He isn't looking at fuel reports or casualty lists. He is looking at the sky. He knows that his tanks are stalled in the deep snow, and the paratroopers in Bastogne are down to their last clips of ammunition. He turns to his chaplain, Colonel James O'Neill. "Padre," Patton barks, his eyes narrow and sharp. "I want you to write a prayer for good weather. I'm tired of these Germans using the clouds as a shield. I want the sun to come out so we can kill him." O'Neill hesitates, wondering if the general is losing his mind. "Sir, it's not customary to petition the Lord for better killing weather." Patton's hand drops to the grip of his revolver. "I don't care if it's customary. Do it." The resulting Patton prayer was printed on 250,000 small cards and distributed to every soldier in the Third Army. It asked for restraint of these immoderate rains and fair weather for battle. Visual close-up of a weathered, dirt-stained prayer card held by a shivering GI in a foxhole. Whether by divine intervention or a freak meteorological shift, the impossible happened. On the morning of December 23rd, the great fog didn't just drift away, it shattered. The sun burst through the clouds with a brilliance that blinded the snow-covered landscape. Within the hour, the sky was filled with the roar of thousands of Pratt and Whitney engines. The Allied air forces, finally unleashed, descended on the German columns like hawks in a chicken coop. At the Wolfschanze, the news is a death knell. Hitler is told that his weather luck has run out. But more importantly, he is told that Patton has broken through. General Patton's tanks have reached the perimeter of Bastogne, a staff officer whispers. Hitler collapses into his chair. His Ardennes offensive, his last, great gamble to win the war, has been broken by the one man he refused to believe could move that fast. Patton hadn't just moved an army. He had moved the very spirit of the war. By December 26th, the 4th Armored Division had punched a hole through the German encirclement. The Phantom had arrived not where he was expected, but exactly where he was needed most. The Battle of the Bulge was effectively over. The German army had spent its last reserves of men, fuel, and hope. Hitler had tried to outblitz the Americans, only to find that Patton had evolved the art of war into something faster, more ruthless, and more unpredictable than the Wehrmacht could ever hope to match. As Patton stood among the liberated, hollow-eyed paratroopers in Bastogne, he didn't look at the wreckage of the German panzers littering the road. He looked east, toward the Rhine, toward the heart of the Reich. "They're finished," he said, lighting a fresh cigar. "They just don't know it yet. Let's go find out if the water in the Rhine is as cold as they say it is." For Hitler, the appearance of Patton in the Ardennes was the final realization that the end was no longer a possibility, it was an inevitability. The man who had been a ghost in England, a lightning bolt in Normandy, and a savior in Belgium was now a hunter. And the hunt was heading for Berlin.